Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our next panel, Managing Groundwater Challenges and Solutions. My name is Courtney Briggs. I am part of the public policy team at AFBF, and I'm here to introduce our next panelists. First, let me just give a little background on the panel that we have here today. Groundwater challenges are increasing for farmers and ranchers across the country, both in terms of access to groundwater and groundwater quality. I'm delighted that we can provide the opportunity for you to hear firsthand accounts from farmers in 2 different parts of the country about groundwater challenges in their area and how they have worked to overcome them. And most recently, we've seen the federal government start to ask more questions related to groundwater, which has always fallen under the jurisdiction of the states. We are excited to have these farmers here to share their experiences and offer advice that may help many other farmers. First, I would like to introduce Ray Flickner. Ray is a 5th-generation farmer who owns and operates Flickner Farm and created the Flickner Innovation Farm Project, a partnership between his farm, university researchers, and industry leaders to identify and test conservation practices in an on-farm setting. Ray served on the Groundwater Management District Board of Directors and was also a member of the Kansas Water Authority. Ray's work has been recognized statewide, and he and his family have won many awards, but most notably, the Flickners were presented with the Leopold Conservation Award in 2023. I'd also like to introduce Jenny Holderman, H&H Family Farms out of California. Jenny is a 4th-generation California farmer. She grew up in Chino, California, where her family farmed almonds and walnuts. She currently serves as president of Kern County Family Farm Bureau and a board member of the California Farm Bureau Board of Directors. She also serves as the executive director of the Water Association of Kern County. Jenny and her husband, Tim, farm almonds with her husband's family, and she direct markets her almonds under the brand Almond Girl Jenny. So I really encourage you guys to go check out her online storefront. I send my friends there to buy almonds all the time. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic off to our panelists. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so thanks guys. I'm going to kick us off first talking about California. And I'm sure you've all probably heard a little bit about California water lately in the news. Everyone likes to talk about it, but very little actually understand the complexity involved in California and especially groundwater. So in order to understand that a little, I'm going to backstep us a bit and talk about how our water dynamics in California and how groundwater plays a role in that. So there is a little map, hopefully you guys can see that, of California. And as you can tell, a lot of rain falls in the north end of the state, not a lot in the southern end of the state. I'm where that orange little blob is down at the end. That longer triangular county is Kern County. That's where I farm. We get about 5 inches of rain annually. That's not a lot, 5 inches. So you can imagine it's quite common for us to move a lot of that water from the north end down to the southern end. That's where about 80% of our demand of water is in that southern end of the state, where about 75% of the water actually comes from the northern end of the state. So we've built a series of canals and aqueducts over the last 50 years to bring that water. We have the State Water Project, which is one of our big sources of water, and the Federal Water Project, which is, of course, the federal component of water. Those coupled with local streams and rivers paired with groundwater make up the combination of our water supplies in California. But not everybody has access to all of those different water outlets and those sources of water. So as an example, where I live in Kern County, we have 5 different sources of water, and this picture kind of depicts where your water's coming from. So some water districts in our area get water from the state, some get water from the feds, some are solely reliant on groundwater, while some have a combination of maybe all 3 of those. So when we're talking about water and where it's coming from, it's really complex because not one area is just like the other. other, and we all have a different demand set on water. But when we don't get water from one source of water, it pulls on the other, right? So in our state, we don't get our full allocations of water. What that means is our farmers, our water districts we have contracts for a certain allocation of water, but when the state only gives us about 5% of that allocation of state water, then we pull from the groundwater. And over the last 23 years, we haven't gotten our full allocations of surface water, hence why we have such a big draw on our groundwater. And where that came from. A lot of our water supplies, we also talk about the delta, and that's really special to understand a little bit background about the delta. That's the red little circle area. There's a lot of rivers and streams that flow into the delta, and through the delta, it flows out to the ocean. Or it can flow downstream to Kern County, where I am, or to Southern California. And those different combinations of streams, and the delta is so special because it is naturally a swamp area, so it is a feeder to the ocean, but it also is a feeder to the rest of the down end. So people own water rights, which is a whole nother topic, and these percentages are the water rights owned through the delta, but unfortunately about 76% of the water that flows into the delta flows out to the ocean. That's all managed by the state and the priorities of water given that. So in our state, in California, there's the human right to water, that's number one, and then there's the fish, the environment, the tribes, and agriculture is down here. So all of those sources and the water that goes out to the ocean is to manage the environment that we have there. So unlike popular belief, this is actually the makeup of water. The environment takes about 80% of California's water, where agriculture gets about 15%. But a lot of that is our reservoirs and our storage of water in California. So we do have some storage. We haven't built new water storage in about 50 years in California. We've actually taken out some of our groundwater storage that we have, but a big component of that is where farmers are now doing these things locally. So like our farm and many others, we have started to store water when we do have it in the ground and our aquifers for recharge. So we have what we call reverse tile drains, where some of you in some of the other areas of the country might use tile drains to flush water off of your farms. We use tile drains to store water when we have excess surface water. And we're able to store that through the series of those tiles and the groundwater systems and store that water underground. So when there is a drought, we're able to pull that water up later on. But it also helps us recharge, because where we are in the state, we are extracting more water than we're putting in. So when we have that extra water, it's important for us to store it. But because of those laws and our extraction, the government passed a law called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act 10 years ago that's now controlling our groundwater supply. So over the course of the next 15 years, we'll have monitoring wells, and the government will control how much water we're extracting from our ground via those monitoring systems. So really, we don't get our surface water because the government has curtailed that, and now they're curtailing our groundwater supply. So it's estimated that, of the 25 million acres of farmland that we have in California, we'll lose about 1 million of that by 2040, just in the Central Valley alone. And California is the #1 ag state. In our county where I farm, we have about $8.6 billion of ag value, and that'll be cut in a quarter because of these groundwater regulations. So that's as quickly as I can talk about groundwater in California as I can, and I'll let Ray talk about Kansas.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll ask the question later when we get back to the recharge project, but just a little bit about where we're at relative to I am in the central part of Kansas, and I'll show you a map there, but this is an illustration of some of the different application techniques we're using in terms of applying the irrigated water. For the most part, we do not have a federal water issue, though there is some with some reservoirs and so forth, but typically in the state of Kansas, when we talk about groundwater, we're talking about state of Kansas water rights. But you'll notice over on your right-hand side there's some illustration. A lot of you probably are familiar with, to a certain degree, subsurface drip. There's not a lot of ways to show a picture of that, but that is an illustration of what we've got there. I'll show a bit about the other two techniques there as well. As a perspective as to where we're exactly at, here's a map of the United States with the different groundwater areas, and you'll notice there in the blue in the center part of the state, that is the High Plains Aquifer. Covers, in fact, I believe it's, if not the largest, one of the largest natural aquifers in the world, from basically South Dakota clear down here to Texas. A lot of talk over a long time relative to the Ogallala, which I know folks here in Texas and Oklahoma, Ogallala is a term that we throw out and we talk about quite often. As a clarification, I am not in the Ogallala. If you'll notice clear over in the center part of the state there's a blue star there that talks about the equus beds. That's where we're located. So in theory, we are part of the High Plains Aquifer, of which the Ogallala is, but we are not in the Ogallala itself. And the reality with that one is a lot of the issues we have in terms of the Ogallala are also applicable about where I'm at. The difference typically has been, or the difference is, in the fact that we have a very shallow aquifer. We will hit water at 60 feet, Jenny, but our shale will be anywhere from 100 to 140 feet. So the saturated thickness is not very deep, but since we are so shallow, we do have substantial possibilities for recharge when we have surface runoff events. We will recharge when we get stream flow and so forth. This is a graph of what the water table has done with two index wells within 2 or 3 miles of where we're farming. And you'll notice that we see approximately about a 10 to a 15 foot decline in terms of the aquifer level. That in some ways doesn't sound too alarming, other than the fact, as I just said, when you have water at 60 feet and you're hit bedrock at 100 feet, your 40-foot saturation, 15 foot of that is almost half of your saturated thickness. So the amount of water there is declining. Like I said, we're seeing a lot of the same issues as they do with the Ogallala. The reality of the Ogallala is a much deeper aquifer where we're down to 100 or a couple of 100 feet. This is a picture, and I'll just draw your attention. Don't worry about the graphs, but the illustration there, you'll notice in the diagram there are a number of different shaded territory. This is a project, and Dr. Brad Doran will be following us from NASA, but this is a project with NASA called OpenET, whereby we are measuring the amount of evaporation from the satellite imagery, and I think Brad will talk about that. The squares that you see outlined there are basically the operation that we're dealing with at the Flickner farm. I will draw your attention to the one there on the right side, and you go a little to the center there, you'll see a real dark blue. That is one of my neighbors who is using considerable amount of water, more than we are. So we have been attempting to conserve the water. In fact, with the application processes that we've been using, and this is a new one we just put on the farm this year. It is basically an autonomous self-propelled water delivery system that goes through the field and applies the water with the drops, as you can see there. But the Division of Water Resources, who is the one that oversees the water rights in the state of Kansas, has done a study, and we several years ago were using 40% less water on our operation than what the county average was. So I think we've got evidence here that by some of the technology that we've got available and some of the techniques and management sensors and so forth, that there are some opportunities to do considerable amount of water savings. And in our area, that's very important because The groundwater district says that if we could reduce our water usage by 5, 7, 8%, that our aquifer would be sustainable and hopefully recharge. So if you can come up with a 40% reduction, that solves a lot of the problems in terms of what the aquifer arrangement would be. So God did bless us with a nice situation there. Jenny, it just requires rainfall to get that to happen. But as I said, this is a brand new system here that we just put. In fact, we were the first one in the state of Kansas. I understand there's about 100 of them across the world, but it runs off of a reel from a pumping location, drops the water as it goes through the field. The neat thing with this one, it will do that with a minimal amount of irrigation flow. We've had cases, particularly in western Kansas and the Ogallala, where they used to pump 1,200 gallons a minute, and now they're down to 200 gallons a minute because of the drawdown. And this system here will work with lower flow. Still trying to figure this one out. It wasn't without some issues, some of which were management issues. As you were learning a new thing here, that gets real heavy when it gets full of water. When that hose gets full of water, it is heavy, and mud is a problem. The way that works, though, when it goes one way, it puts the water on the outside of the boom, and when it backs up, that's when it waters behind the tires. So the tires stay dry the whole time, so it does not rut it up. Another technique that we've used, did this 7, 8 years ago. We retrofitted an aged pivot arrangement with precision mobile drip. Basically put the drip line on the pivot, and the pivot, as it goes through the field, will emit the water. You will notice in that the drip tape is not on the ground. When you have 8-foot corn, it does run up in the canopy. That was one of the issues when we started. They said, well, you need to plant in a circle so that the drip tape will run on the ground. I said, well, if that's the deal, that's a no-go, because I'm not going to plant in a circle. And our experience has been it works very well, even when it rides up in the canopy like it does there. Been reasonably pleased with that. Again, trying to figure out how to do what we want to do with less water and become more efficient. And if you are interested, there is a bunch of sites we have. If you want to take a picture of those QR codes, we are working with Kansas State University, also with KU and the Geological Society, monitoring waters and so forth. I will point out also one of the things, and I primarily have talked about the quantity side, but we also have a quality issue. I surround a couple of municipal wells with an adjoining town that has high nitrates, and so we're very closely trying to monitor that level. In fact, they were in excess of standards that we could have for drinking water. Now, I will say that the last couple of tests they've done, Jenny, the samples have got better. I'm going to take full credit for that, because I know if it was going the other way, who would get blamed with that one? So
Now, Ray, where we are, we have some new nitrate control systems that we now have to report nitrate usage. Do you have that as well?
well, as an irrigator, I do not have to report you report the amount of nitrogen that you're applying.
But not in your soil. They're not monitoring any of that yet.
Not yet. Not yet. We're not there. We're not there. So, Jenny, I guess before I open up for questions, I would be intrigued if you could explain a little bit about the tile recapture.
Tile drains.
Tile drains,
yes.
and how you're using that.
Yeah, so it's the opposite of what a lot of people are used to using tile drains to remove the water from your surface. Maybe you get too much water. I wish we had too much water was our problem. But we don't have enough. So we use the reverse of tile drains. So when there is excess runoff in the mountains or excess surface water that is available, always during the winter months, right? And that's when we don't need to be irrigating. Our trees, our crops are dormant in the winter. We don't really need to irrigate. So, but we can't capture that water, or else it's released out to the ocean is the other alternative. So we capture as much as we can and we store that water, whether that be a lot of water districts have above ground or below ground banking projects, but on farms we reverse those tile drains to store the water under. So it's those series of those tiles and pipes to really store that water underground. It's like a giant bathtub underneath our orchards, and we're able to utilize the top to farm it, but also on the bottom to store that water like a reservoir underground. And then in the summer when we don't have water, we're able to pump that water back up and use it to irrigate with, and it helps to recharge. So it's a double benefit that we have.
So most of the recharge then goes into the aquifer. It's not in a reservoir above ground. It's underground.
So on farm, it's all done underground. There are a lot of bigger projects, government projects that are done above ground. But we actually have in our county too. We have the largest banking project in the world. It's called the Kern Water Bank, and it's able to store almost 6 million acre feet underground. So it really is capacity in our county that we bank a lot of water in our county. Where we meet is the end of the state water project and the federal water project come right through us, and we have a Kern River, which is a large source of water. So it's a perfect little area right there that we're able to bank a lot of water, and that capacity is actually larger than a lot of the reservoirs that we have in the state of California. So it's a pretty unique area.
Well, I know we're running out of time here. Want to throw it open to you all out there. Questions you might have?
Yeah, there's a microphone in the middle for anybody that wants to ask us some questions.
Questions for the gentleman. How do you fund those projects that you put in?
Me and the banker.
You don't have equip or assistance like that?
We have made numerous applications with equip, and it's been a hodgepodge. The drip, my first drip system. This will be the 25th season, so we're 25 years old with that one. In our area, and I know there's a lot of drip tape in the southwest part of California, Arizona. But in central Kansas, that was a whole new concept. And I was an early adapter prior to any type of cost share availability being available. We have received some EQIP, CSP money, so forth. Again, part of the dilemma, and I've had a request in for 2 years now on a piece of property, well, the one that has the pivot that is getting some age to it, about installing drip tape. We've been in queue now 3 years, I believe, and we never rank out. Our challenge is being in the eastern part of Kansas with the Ogallala issues the way they are. They seem to gain a lot of presence. So there's been some cost share on some of the installs, but for the most part, I financed it otherwise. With the idea that the efficiency that you gain from the water usage, and also the fertilizer efficiency by being able to inject fertilizer and do that does pencil out.
Any other questions? We've got 1 minute.
What kind of pressure are you running on that 360, and how do you pay for that energy? That's the problem I have with that system.
Well, that 360 unit is a unique critter in the fact that it is an energy hog. Because what you're doing is you're pumping water through 3,000 feet of 3-inch hose. And it's got to go through all the hose to, whether you're next door or the other side of the field. Friction loss is very large with that. You end up at the pumping location before it goes in the hose. They recommend 120 psi, so you have a booster pump there that's running. Though I will say that, and again, I'm still trying to figure that out. We're watering from a battery of wells because we have limited water, and there's some complications with that one. we are running less than 120 psi. We're down to, in some cases, about 80 or 90 psi at the point. Now, by the time it gets to the delivery point on the rig, you're at 5 to 7 pounds of pressure. But it takes a lot of energy, a lot of pressure to get it through that hose. But the thing with that one, and the reason why I went there with it, is an odd-shaped field, pivot doesn't work because of homesteads, short deal, limited water to begin with. This way, if I run out of water, at least the unit's mobile. I can move it someplace else, and that was kind of the driving force. So, Jenny, looks like we're out of time.
That's it. Thank you all.